Why I Occupy started with a conversation I had with an old friend of mine last night. And it comes down to a really, really basic principle that I think the internet is helping become a more mainstream idea and reality to how people think, that isn't clouded by the former mainstream news media, which is radio and television. And what it comes down to is each one of us, each individual, whoever you are, wherever you are, if you have a job or some sort of duty or obligation, what it always comes down to is the ethical question of, for example, let's say I worked at a bank, or let's pick something more low key. Let's say I worked at a grocery store, right? And outside there was somebody expressing their views on disagreements of how this grocery store operated and treated their employees. And let's say that this person's a former employee, and my boss comes up to me, and essentially what I have to do for my job is whatever he requests me to do to help further the operation of our business. And so out of respect of his authority, he asks me to go remove this demonstrator. And he tells me, by any means necessary, you can beat him up, you can pull a gun on him, and you can go throw him in a cage. Now, I don't think many people will disagree that if you were in that situation, receiving that instruction, you would have no question, you would have no hesitation to look at your superior, to look at your boss and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to handle it that way, because I really don't think that if this guy disagrees with me, that I should just go, beat him up and pull a gun on him and throw him in a cage. I'd pepper spray him and shoot him with bean bags and shoot smoke bomb canisters at people's heads. Like, none of us are really going to say that that's going to fix the situation, right? And so I think that just ethically, morally, if you want to get into that nobody is really, really trying to keep their job to that extent if they really broke it down and looked at it in that reality, which is what it is. There's no question about that. That's what it is. And so why I Occupy is because we can look back in history, and you can go look this up for yourself, and you can choose whatever way that you want to perceive it. So this is just my perception, but we can look back in history, and we can see since Egypt, I'll say, for example, that we as human beings, and how we receive our information has slowly been increasing, and within the past 100 years that rate has multiplied itself dozens of times, thousands of times. But the way that we would receive information and how we viewed ourselves and the orders we had to carry out and what our duties and obligations were to society and to our families and whatnot was dictated by emperors and rulers and dictators and kings and warlords and lunatics and some king's son who was appointed to take over his kingdom when he was 15, and he basically did whatever he wanted and said whatever he wanted. And that's really what it came down to, because the power of people was always concentrated within these groups of individuals within power, within the state, essentially. And humanity as a whole has been progressing away from the state and away from being controlled and dictated. People want to be able to better their lives and ensure that their children will be taken care of and that their friends and family will be taken care of, and that we can all work together to make that happen. And I Occupy because I think that what Occupy Wall Street is slowly proving is that we can have a society where people are equal, even if we have different perspectives and perceptions on how necessary the state is. And essentially, the solidarity that's happening all around the world of people stepping up and saying that, you know, just because you were ordered to arrest me or beat me or stop me from speaking my opinion, I will stand against that in solidarity and in peace and in nonviolence, and I will sit down and I will let you arrest me. And we'll further this point, and we'll further this case and this cause that power essentially is corrupt at this point. And if we as a society, as human beings, can come together in solidarity and respect this peaceful way of taking care of our issues, we can exceed leaps and bounds by how people are taken care of as far as medical issues and welfare programs and whatever you wanna get into, and whatever language you want to use to understand taking care of people and the essential basic needs of people, and all of the language that the government has structured into the way that we think about those things and how we think about what the reality of those things are. So essentially, it really comes down to the question that we need to get across to people today on November 17th, and the day of mass action, of solidarity with what's happening in the Occupy movement, is that we need to engage people to understand that corruption happens when individuals are willing to silence, beat, cage, gun down, otherwise assault other people, no matter what their race, nationality is, no matter what country they live in, and what reason we think it may be necessary, or why our superiors might tell us it's necessary. We as people need to stop and question that sort of thing. We have to stop and question and say, I as a person cannot carry out that order. I as a person cannot go assault someone, pull a gun on them and throw them in a cage because they disagree with me. It's a completely different subject when things are violent and when things are chaotic, and when somebody is forcefully taking the rights and freedom of other people to just be happy and enjoy their lives without theft and violence. So I think we just need to engage people in the reality of what this all breaks down to. That people are stepping up to say, we're not going to carry out these orders. If you're a police officer, if you're a government official, if you're whatever you are, I ask you just to apply that simple ethic of, is it okay as a person to another person, no matter who told me to do it or why they told me to do it or what they think the better good of this all is it okay for me to pull a gun out on someone, beat them up, completely assault them and violate them and throw them in a cage? Is that okay? And when people want to argue when those situations are necessary, then go ahead and let's figure out when those are necessary. But when people are peacefully walking down the street trying to express the overall grievances of a nation and essentially of the entire world at this point, because information is being spread across the whole world via the internet, which has accelerated this whole train of thought that people no longer want to be enslaved by corrupt power. People no longer want to be dictated by the corruption that people get within these levels of authority, and that you can just buy off entire countries and start wars for the interests of your bank account. This train of thought's dying out, and people are understanding this, and more people are realizing they are the 99%. You know, like police officers are coming out and saying, hey, I get this. So if you get this, question it. Go to your superiors and break it down. There's a gun in the room, and it's called coercion, and the only way that is going to sustain, the only sustainable way of society is a voluntary society. That's just where humanity has progressed to, and people are starting to understand this, because that's really what this breaks down to, is that people are voluntarily coming out to support the democracy of their local environments and their states and their countries and all over the world. People are coming out voluntarily to do this, voluntarily to educate other people that this is the reality of what it comes down to, and what they're being stopped by or resisted by, if you will, and failing, is the corruption of force and the corruption of power that people will just submit to orders to violate other people and be okay with it. And that idea is clashing with a voluntary idea. And that's where we're at as a people. Around the entire world, people are coming together with understanding this, because the internet makes what I'm sitting here saying and doing, that people can just click on YouTube and watch this. That's happening all around the world, and people are finally being able to communicate with people and realize that all of these systems are corrupt, that the news is just bought off by these people, and they're going to spit the same propaganda and whatever to make people support that and believe that this is really all that's happening. And people are understanding that's just not the case. And so if you're in a state where, if you're in a situation where you're asked to violate that right of another person, then what Occupy can simply be broken down to is occupy that question. Occupy that question in your mind. If you're in a march, in a protest today, and you're confronted by a police officer, or maybe somebody's just curious of what's going on, occupy that thought and that conversation, that essentially we're voluntarily coming out here and trying to express and educate to people the corruption that's happening within our system. And we're being met with the idea that power gives people the authority to silence that question and that education process. And that's essentially the basics of what it all comes down to. And when people grasp that concept, that these are just two ideas that are finally clashing in a very realistic way that you can watch on TV and watch on the internet. Those two ideas are clashing, and people are really waking up and asking that question. And so I ask you to occupy everything. Occupy your right to live freely and think and speak freely, and voluntarily walk down the street and carry a sign that can educate someone and start a conversation. Occupy that idea, and occupy engaging people who disagree with a very simple question. Would you pull out a gun and throw me in a cage because I disagree with you? Because essentially that's what's being done by the police and by the state against this movement. And it's absolutely wrong, and everybody knows it. And there doesn't need to be a whole bunch of propaganda to wrap your head around that idea. And that's really what this all comes down to.